Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today's story takes place in Bay City, Michigan, and it's a crazy one. On April 28, 1982, around 10 p.m., 51-year-old Rudolph Helmreich was found dead in an upstairs bedroom by his girlfriend, 52-year-old Dorothy Morris. His death appeared to be from natural causes. An autopsy failed to pinpoint the cause of death, but alcohol poisoning and a drug overdose were ruled out. A depressant was found in his system, but not enough to be fatal. There were no injuries or signs of violence. Rudolph went by Rudy and had actually been convicted on March 23, 1982, for two felonies of two arsons on two of his rental properties. He was released on his own recognizance until sentencing, which was scheduled 4 days after his death. Dorothy and Rudy met in 1980. Dorothy would collect rent payments for Rudy and was working with the city on code violations at his properties. On April 28th, she said she left her home about 9 a.m. to go to Flint with her son and his girlfriend. They returned at around 10 p.m. and found Rudy dead. Within 2 days of Rudy's death, Dorothy filed a claim in probate court since she was the sole beneficiary of Rudy's estate. A week later, Rudy's 18-year-old daughter Jill hired a lawyer to contest this. In 1975, her father had filed a will with probate naming her and three of his nephews as beneficiaries. October 21st, 1982, 6 months after Rudy was found dead, Dorothy appeared in probate court in front of a six-person jury. The will appeared to be a forgery. Rudy's last name was spelled wrong, and the person listed as the witness on the will testified that was not her signature and she did not witness the signing. Dorothy was ordered to pay Rudy's estate $22,000 from an insurance policy and $100,000 that was taken from his bank account. 13 deeds for rentals owned by Rudy that had been fraudulently signed over to Dorothy were invalidated and returned to his estate. No criminal charges were filed. Shortly after the hearing, a witness came forward stating that Rudy had been drugged and smothered while lying in an upstairs bedroom at Dorothy's home. November 4th, 1982. Warrants were issued for Dorothy's 16-year-old son and his 22-year-old friend. The 22-year-old was also suspected of starting a fire at one of Dorothy's rental properties. Bay County Sheriff's Department planned to have Rudy's body exhumed based on this new evidence, and a court order would not be necessary since Rudy's family had given permission. Dorothy's son was arrested after being found hiding in a closet in Dorothy's home. His friend had been caught over the border in Canada outside of Toronto and was being prepared to be extradited back to the United States. Dorothy's son was placed in a maximum security juvenile detention center. November 11th, 1982, Rudy's body was transported by sheriff escort to Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, which was about an hour and a half away. The chief medical examiner in Michigan State would perform a second autopsy. November 15th, 1982, Dorothy's 16-year-old son's father posted bond and he was released to his father's care. Bay County said they normally would not release someone charged with murder, but since he was a minor, they allowed it. His hearing to determine if he would be charged as an adult was scheduled for November 29th. November 19th, 1982, the 22-year-old was returned to Bay County and taken into custody. He confessed that he held Rudy's feet down while Dorothy's son smothered Rudy with a leather jacket. He also confessed to setting fire to the vacant rental property Dorothy owned on June 22, 1982. It had been vacant at the time, and the fire caused $7,500 in damage. A third person was implicated in the murder but hadn't been named nor arrested at this time. November 29, 1982, Dorothy's son's hearing was held. The pathologist who performed the second autopsy said the drug levels found in Rudy's system were borderline. He was not able to find the cause of death due to the amount of time that had elapsed. The witness who had turned in the two men testified that the 16-year-old tearfully confessed twice, saying he murdered Rudy because he wanted his mom to love him. The witness was the girlfriend of another of Dorothy's sons. She stated the 16-year-old also confessed the night before Rudy's murder, both he and the 22-year-old drove Rudy in a pickup truck to a field about 25 miles away. The 22-year-old put his hand over Rudy's face and tried to smother him, but Rudy was able to fight him off, and they threw him out of the truck in the field and left him there. Rudy's sister also testified that Rudy said he was beat up and left in a field, and he walked to a nearby bar and called her to pick him up. The third person involved was also revealed, and it was none other than Dorothy Morris. The same witness who turned in the two men said for some reason Dorothy was mad at Rudy and wanted him dead. She said Dorothy would rant and rave about knocking Rudy off or shooting him and throwing him in the Saginaw River. The witness told Dorothy, "You can't do that. If you get caught, you will go to jail." And Dorothy said, "I'm not that stupid. I will have someone else do it." Police sought a warrant for Dorothy's arrest on November 22nd, but when they went to Dorothy's house to arrest her, the house was vacant. They had released a bulletin to other law enforcement agencies, but so far were not able to locate her. Police thought she may be 2.5 hours away in Alpena, where she once operated a nursing home, but it was shut down due to problems with her license. Her first arrest was in 1964 for larceny. From 1972 through 1979, she had 3 convictions of forgery and theft. January 7, 1983, both men had a joint hearing. The judge ruled there was enough evidence of murder, even though the cause of death was inconclusive. The son would be charged as an adult, and both men were bound over to stand trial for murder. Dorothy's son's girlfriend testified that all of them were living in the house with Dorothy. The 22-year-old, the 16-year-old, both she and Dorothy's other son, and the three of them did drive to Flint with Dorothy, and that she left Rudy heavily medicated and sleeping. The other two stayed back at the house and used a pillow and leather jacket to smother Rudy, and the police were called at 11 p.m., almost an hour after they allegedly returned from Flint. January 19, 1983. Dorothy was found living in a rental home in Edmore, Michigan. It was nowhere near Alpena. It was over an hour west of Bay City. The home is no longer there, but sat just beyond this sign. Dorothy had applied for a job on November 15, 1982, under the name of Barbara McDonald, and was hired as a nurse's aide at Quality Care Nursing Home in Lansing. It used to be at this location. Her first assignment was caring for a 79-year-old woman. The woman was in the nursing home after recovering from surgery. Some reports said Dorothy was able to convince the woman to leave the nursing home after 2 days, but family members of the woman say she was released and Dorothy offered to provide live-in care at the woman's home. They started out at the woman's home in Lansing, but then Dorothy rented a house in Okemos at an undisclosed location and moved the woman into that home. Dorothy fraudulently opened a bank account in Lansing under her fake name, Barbara McDonald, and gave the address of the rental home she and the woman were living in. She made a transfer of approximately $129,000 from the woman's bank account to hers. The bank teller thought it was suspicious, so the next time Barbara came in, she activated a security camera to capture her picture and alerted the police. The woman still had $80,000 in her bank account. A concerned nephew from Illinois contacted police because his aunt's whereabouts were unknown and they hadn't heard from her since she left the nursing home. Police went to the rental where the elderly woman was living, and a person matching Dorothy's description answered the door and said the woman was in the hospital. Luckily, that was true. The nephew said at first his aunt didn't know she was being held captive, but she wasn't allowed to answer the telephone, go outside, and when someone knocked at the door, she was put in another room. After she was released from the hospital, she was staying with friends in another part of Michigan. Meanwhile, police who were investigating the bank fraud alerted Bay County. Bay County deputies arrived at the home Dorothy and her daughter rented in Edmore and staked it out the previous day, January 18th, not knowing if Dorothy was inside, so they waited. The morning of January 19th, they saw Dorothy and her daughter leave the house by car, so they followed it. The car was being driven by Dorothy's daughter when it stopped in front of an Edmore drugstore. The Bay County undersheriff got out and hopped on the hood of the car. Dorothy's daughter put the car in gear and started to drive away with him on the hood. So he drew his gun and they stopped. Dorothy claimed she didn't know there was a warrant out on her and didn't understand why she was being arrested because she wasn't driving. Another of Dorothy's daughters was in the back seat. A search of her Edmore rental home turned up several documents belonging to the elderly woman she defrauded, including cashier's checks, a rare coin collection, traveler's checks, cash, a list of nursing home phone numbers, an unmailed letter addressed to the newspaper seeking a divorced male companion. She had a travel packet for Florida and a packed suitcase. She had talked the woman into signing over her car and traded it in and purchased two automobiles. That is how police tracked her to the Edmore home. But on one of the cars, she used the elderly woman's name, and that is how they tracked her to the rental home where the woman was being held captive. January 20th, 1983, Dorothy was arraigned on murder charges in Bay County. On top of murder, she was also facing charges in Ingham County with 4 counts of fraud for bilking the woman out of over $133,000. This just keeps getting deeper. Dorothy seemed to have a boatload of kids. On January 31st, Ingham County issued warrants for both Dorothy and another of her sons for kidnapping the elderly woman. They claimed the woman had been held captive in the rental. Dorothy was charged with 3 counts of embezzlement and 1 count of obtaining property under false pretenses. Well, they knew where Dorothy was, but her son was in the wind. Police alleged Dorothy and her son kept the woman prisoner at the home from November 17th through January 3rd. Dorothy left Lansing and rented the home in Edmore on January 10th. Later in the evening on January 31st, around 7 p.m., Dorothy's 24-year-old son turned himself in to the police department in Alpena. Ingham County arranged to transport him back to their county and also transferred Dorothy back to Ingham County. They both were jailed in Ingham County. Bond was set to $125,000 each. Their hearing was scheduled for February 10th, and Dorothy's hearing in Bay County was set for February 15th. February 10, 1983, charges against Dorothy's 24-year-old son were dropped, and he agreed to testify against his mother. Allegedly, his only involvement was helping his mother move the woman to the rental home. February 15, 1983, the now ex-girlfriend of Dorothy's son testified as she did at the joint hearing for the two responsible for carrying out Rudy's murder. April 7, 1983, both men struck a plea deal with the prosecutors in exchange for testimony against Dorothy. Dorothy's son's charges would be reduced to second-degree murder, and the 22-year-old's charges would be reduced to manslaughter. He could serve 10 years for arson and 15 for manslaughter. He also told prosecutors that Dorothy left the door open at the vacant property and a gas can when he poured the gas and lit a match, it literally blew him out the door. June 21st, 1983, Dorothy's trial began. A bartender at the Arlington Hotel and Bar testified that Rudy and Dorothy had met there in the fall of 1980. They were regulars at the bar. She said in the summer of 1981, Dorothy told a group of regulars she got the deeds to his properties and would joke, "I ought to knock the little effer off." Apparently, Rudy had been hospitalized in a mental institution that summer, and he was afraid he would lose his properties and gave power of attorney to Dorothy and signed over his properties. But when she went to go to the bank to make withdrawals, she was denied. Both medical examiners testified. The first said Rudy had been dead at least 4 to 6 hours before police were called. The other testified there were small traces of an antidepressant and tranquilizer in Rudy's system, which was months after his death. We know the rest of the story. July 8, 1983, Dorothy was found guilty of first-degree murder. On July 25th, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The 22-year-old was also sentenced to 10 to 15 years for his role in the arson and murder. August 11, 1983, Dorothy's son was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. He would be up for parole every 10 years. October 11, 1983, Ingham County decided to reduce Dorothy's charges to 1 count of embezzlement and drop the other 3 charges if she pled guilty. She was sentenced to 10 years. Dorothy's son was 59 years old when he was released, April 30th, 2024. I am surprised he was released at all. He had 5 drug distribution charges while in prison, the last one being in 2022. Even though Dorothy was not eligible for parole, in November of 2024, a parole board reviewed her case and recommended her for parole based on several risk factors, including age and health. On January 9, 2025, she was granted parole. On February 5th, 2025, 95-year-old Dorothy Morris, who earned the nickname Governor during her incarceration, was released to a state medical facility in Macomb County with restrictions: no weapons, no drugs or alcohol, and she cannot leave the state. This concludes today's story. Thank you for watching.